The current situation in this space, and we'll map this space out, is that first off, there's an enormous amount of acronyms that really are kind of confusing. They're even confusing, certainly to me. Can you clear up some of those for me? And I'm going to list up a couple of them, and then I just want you to try to explain really quickly if they all are the same, if they're sort of changing, what is really important about them. So AR, VR is a typical kind of distinction, but then MR and XR, and then you can, if you spell them out, right? So augmentation, augmented reality, virtual reality, mixed reality, extended reality, and let's just start with those and give me a sense. All right, Tuvo, kick it off.
Okay, so augmented reality is when you wear eyeglasses or alike that you can see through, and then you're adding some things into your visual field of view. Super great when you, for example, let's say that you're an UPS courier. You want to be able to know where you need to take the package. You might be driving on the vehicle. You see all through the reality, and then you get that information overlay. It's like what you used to have in the airplane cockpits, where you had this heads-up display where you see through that one, and it has everything that the pilot really needs to be aware at all the times. And that's kind of the thing that's happening now with augmented reality. So making it so that you can actually get that information overlay of the most important things and still keep it wearable. And really, for augmented reality, it must be really wearable, really lightweight, and feel like they're a pair of eyeglasses.
All right. Well, we're obviously going to go into more depth. So that's sort of your quick sort of kitchen sink definition of augmented. Virtual reality now. I'm presuming that is more of a full immersion type situation.
Yeah, of course. So virtual reality, you block the whole world, like the world around you doesn't exist anymore. That's like black. And then you start recreating that world into whatever you please. And that's the virtual reality. So computer completely generates everything that you should see, hear, and of course, even up to the point of feeling. And that's the ultimate goal of virtual reality, where you cannot tell apart that, am I actually in real world, which is really weird, or is this a virtual reality? And
before we go to the next ones, are these two in any way directly related when it comes to the companies that are doing it? We'll talk about the companies later, but are these two things as related as they seem when we say AR, VR, or are they actually quite distinct when it comes to business models, people working on it, use cases, everything?
Yeah, I mean that's a really good question, and it's like, again, as you pointed out, these terms are really loaded, and it's they don't have like a very static definition. And I would say that as long as you talk about AR the way that I described it, so that it's mostly information overlay, it's quite different from the virtual reality. But if we go to the mixed reality, which is all about that you can see some parts of the real world as they are, some of the things could be altered, and then some of these things could be completely virtual. I think it's more of this angle that with augmented reality, you might be able to do everything that virtual reality devices can do if you block also the real world completely. Then it becomes a virtual reality device. On the other hand, with the virtual reality device, if you do it the way that we do, for example, which is that we also digitize the world in real time, then we can manipulate it and then mix it so that certain things are real, certain things have been changed, and certain things are completely virtual. It's this approach that if you start from augmented reality, you are basically needing to replace the world in front of the user, and the world is the foundation. If you start from virtual reality, everything is black and you need to add everything.
Can I ask you a dumb question around that then, Uro? Does that mean that it's kind of a gradual scale where in mixed reality, the point is that you don't know from the outset in the product, or maybe even the journey that the user goes through, one Monday you're doing 70% mixed, and then on Tuesday you're doing 30% mixed, and you're kind of, the product allows you the flexibility? Or is it very, very decided from the beginning that it's given amount of mix of virtual and augmentation and real?
Yeah, I think that's the place we're now. So augmented reality devices are very little bit is augmented, and virtual reality, everything is virtual. But in the upcoming years, those will be mixing. So with augmented reality devices, more and more will be augmented. And with virtual reality devices, you can bring more and more of the real world into your experience. And eventually, in theory, they will have a sweet middle point where you can do the same thing with both devices. But you might be slightly better off if you start from this end of the spectrum than this end of the spectrum for one or the other thing.
All right, so let's just get done with this. Extended reality, is that distinct from mixed? I don't quite understand how that could be so different from mixed. I mean, extended meaning it's better than what? Than real life?
Yeah, I suppose you could say that extended could be that, for example, you can see in the dark. So if you start with this assumption that you digitize the world, then you can extend it with thermal imaging. You can extend it with infrared cameras. And
so this is the Superman
more.
angle, the Superman angle. This is turning us into kind of extra sensorial beings, with superpowers.
Absolutely. And then maybe AI analyzes everything for you. And when you look at the sandbox, you can tell that there are 52 million grains of sand in here.
Right, which would be difficult to count.
Yes.
So why don't you then give us a little bit of a sense of, because this field has had a lot of play, and we're not going to dismiss play, because we know computer games and play and experimental headsets and everything, there was a place for that. But I will admit readily that I have through the years tried many of these, and I'm sort of like scratching my head, when is this going to get really serious? So you either have the attitude of, I'm an early adopter, I like to, do these things and it's nice. The advent of sort of enterprise or industrial grade, all of these abbreviations, when did that start to happen? And, maybe you'll give us a sense of what your position is in this space.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think from my point of view, when we look at the very early days of the VR, the NASA experiences and the early days of 80s and 90s of VR, that's when it was certain very individual companies trying to basically change the way they were working back in those days. For example, NASA doing designs inside virtual reality, and with multiple companies starting aiming to do simulations within the virtual reality. All of that one ended up in cave systems. After that one, an alternative way of achieving the same thing, because it was the shorter goal at that stage. And I'd say that after that one, there was of course a long autumn for VR throughout the 90s and 2000s early on.
Not a winter, but an autumn.
Yeah, keeping it slightly alive, but yeah, and then of course Oculus reinvigorated it with the consumer message. Now, what happened at that stage is that it also created the interest into utilizing this again for these high, very demanding industrial use cases that the guys were trying to do in the 80s and early 90s. The thing is that the devices were not good enough in the 80s and 90s. Computers weren't good enough to actually create experiences, but the displays were roughly the same quality as Oculus actually shipped. And then, of course, later on the HTC Vives and so forth. So the image quality, the lenses, these sort of experiences were almost on the same level. But it was never good enough. And that was the thing that we started to solve when we founded Vario, which was, of course, coming with the background of working at Microsoft and Nokia. And I made a dozen phones and many other types of devices, including VR headset there. And you know that if you go as a startup against existing consumer electronics giants, you really shouldn't be playing on the same field as they are. So
Right.
from our point of view, we thought that, okay, our angle into this one will be to change how these most difficult cases are solved, because that was the area that also had financial sense in the 80s and 90s. So it should have the same financial sense now. Then we started touring the companies, understanding their challenges, understanding the potential, and it's unbelievable when you do VR in the quality level that it needs to be, which is at the human eye resolution. It doesn't need to get any better than that. So if you can simulate everything that you see with the same accuracy in real world, then you can change the way that people do training. You don't need any more expensive equipment. You just put the glasses on and you start training, because that way you're training to the real world, which will always have the same fidelity for everybody, and the same way, of course, for the design. And these were the two areas of the 80s and 90s that people were trying to tackle. And it's one of those interesting anecdotes. So does it actually make sense? Boeing, for example, told us that with our systems compared to traditional way of training in these kind of full dome simulators, it takes roughly 4 hours to pay back the investment into this professional grade VR that we are offering. After that one, it's only benefit for everybody. So